And somewhere in that quiet understanding, something else begins to surface. A realization that doesn't come all at once, but arrives slowly like light adjusting your eyes after a long night. You start to sense that this chapter of your life isn't ending because you failed it. It's ending because it can no longer hold who you've become. There are cycles we choose. And then there are cycles that choose us. Not gently, not conveniently, but with a firm knowing that says you cannot stay here anymore. Aquarius, you've carried responsibilities that weren't fully yours. Roles you stepped into because someone had to. Expectations that sounded reasonable until they started costing you pieces of yourself. You learned how to function inside them. You became dependable, reliable, the one people leaned on. But over time, that structure began to feel tight. Not painful enough to escape immediately, just uncomfortable enough to slowly drain you. And that's the part people rarely talk about. Most endings don't explode. They fade. They lose meaning. They stop feeding your spirit long before they collapse. If you're over 35, chances are you've already lived through one of these invisible endings. A job that no longer reflects your values. A version of success that looks impressive but feels empty. A life plan that made sense 10 years ago but feels foreign now. That doesn't mean you failed. It means you evolved inside a system that didn't evolve with you. Tell me, when was the last time you felt truly seen, not for what you provide but for who you are becoming? There's a quiet grief that comes with outgrowing a life you once worked hard for. Grief doesn't always come from loss. Sometimes it comes from realization. Realizing you stayed loyal to something long after it stopped being loyal to you. Aquarius energy isn't meant to be boxed in forever. You're wired for expansion, for redefinition, for asking questions that disrupt comfort, especially your own. That's why this ending feels strange. You didn't ask for it. You didn't plan it. But deep down you know, continuing the same way would have slowly disconnected you from yourself. And here's the honest part. Slowing down. Changing direction. Starting again. These are not signs of weakness at this stage of life. They're signs of integrity. Integrity with your time. With your energy. With the years you still want to live awake. You are not late. You are not irresponsible for reconsidering. You are not dramatic for wanting something that feels more aligned. You're responding to an internal truth that has finally become louder than expectation. So if you feel both relieved and unsettled right now, that makes sense. Endings that come from growth often feel like that. They close quietly. But they open something honest. Stay with this feeling. Because once you stop judging yourself for needing a different life than the one you built before, the next direction will start revealing itself in ways that feel less forced and more true than anything you've known before. And once you stop judging yourself for needing a different life, something subtle begins to happen. The confusion you've been carrying starts to soften, not disappear. Just loosen its grip. You begin to realize you didn't suddenly lose your sense of direction. You simply stopped pretending the old one still worked. For a long time, you followed a path that made sense on paper. It was logical, responsible, understandable to everyone else, and for a while it even worked. But Aquarius, you weren't built to live inside a life that only functions. You were built to live inside a life that means something. So when that path stopped speaking to you, your mind tried to label it as confusion, as uncertainty, as something to fix. But what if it wasn't a problem at all? What if it was discernment finally waking up? There's a kind of intelligence that doesn't rush forward. It pauses, it questions, it refuses to keep moving just because momentum exists. And that intelligence is often mistaken for doubt. People don't talk enough about this, but many of the most thoughtful adults, the ones who've burned out, walked away from marriages that no longer reflected truth, or stepped out of careers that slowly emptied them, they didn't do so because they were lost. They did it because something inside them could no longer tolerate a life without alignment. Tell me something quietly. When you imagine going back to the old version of your life, does your body relax or does it tighten? That response, that immediate knowing in your chest, that's not confusion. That's clarity arriving before language catches up. Aquarius energy is future-oriented. You feel into what's coming before you can explain it, before it's socially acceptable, before it has a name. And that's why this phase feels lonely at times, because you're standing in between identities, no longer who you were, not yet fully who you're becoming. That space can feel disorienting, but it's also deeply honest. You're not wandering aimlessly. You're shedding what no longer fits without replacing it with something false just to feel secure. That takes courage, especially in a world that praises certainty even when certainty is hollow. There is dignity in refusing to live on autopilot. There is wisdom in questioning a path that demands your energy but starves your spirit. And maybe for the first time in your life, you're not asking, what should I do next? You're asking, what kind of life actually feels true to me now? That question doesn't come from immaturity. It comes from having lived enough to know the cost of ignoring yourself. So if right now your life feels less defined, less labeled, less predictable, that doesn't mean you're drifting. It means you've stepped out of a story that was finished even if no one announced the ending. Stay with this openness, this spaciousness, this unfamiliar freedom. Because once you stop calling it being lost and start recognizing it as outgrowing, the next direction won't need to be forced. It will feel like recognition, like remembering something you once knew but weren't ready to live yet. And that is where the light starts to change. And somewhere inside that openness, something else begins to shift. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough for you to notice that you're no longer pushing the same way you used to. There was a time when effort felt like survival, when holding everything together meant staying alert, prepared, braced for impact. You learned how to anticipate, how to manage, how to stay one step ahead so nothing could fall apart, and you did it well. But lately, forcing doesn't come as naturally anymore. You feel it in your body first. A tightening when you over-explain. A fatigue when you try to control outcomes. A quiet resistance when you bend yourself to fit expectations that no longer feel necessary. This isn't giving up. It's discernment. Aquarius, there's a difference between effort and pressure, between commitment and control, between caring and carrying what was never meant to be yours. And you're starting to sense that difference now. You've noticed it, haven't you, how when you stop chasing clarity, it shows up on its own, how when you don't force a conversation, the right words arrive later, cleaner, truer. Life begins to respond differently when you stop gripping it so tightly. Not because you became passive, but because you finally trusted yourself enough to place your energy where it actually matters. There's a maturity that comes with realizing you don't need to convince the world of your worth. You don't need to perform strength. You don't need to keep proving you belong. You already do. And the more you honor that, the less resistance you meet. Things don't suddenly become easy, but they become lighter. Opportunities find you without urgency. Conversations feel less defensive. Decisions don't require endless justification. Tell me something, when was the last time you allowed things to unfold without trying to manage every possible outcome? That question matters more than it seems. Because control often comes from fear. Fear of loss. Fear of disappointment. Fear of being misunderstood. But real release comes from self-trust. Trust that you can handle what comes next, even if it looks different than expected. Trust that you don't have to exhaust yourself to earn a life that fits. Aquarius energy was never meant to be wasted on constant tension. It's meant to flow, to observe, to respond intelligently, not react emotionally. And now you're learning where to apply effort and where to step back. That's not withdrawal. That's wisdom. You're choosing your battles, your conversations, your commitments, and quietly life notices. It meets you with less friction, less noise, less demand to explain yourself. This is what happens when you stop forcing timing and start honoring alignment. Not everything needs to be chased. Some things need space to find you. Stay in this gentler rhythm, because what's forming now requires clarity, not tension. And soon you'll begin to feel it, that subtle sense that you're no longer pushing against life, but finally moving with it. And that is when the direction ahead starts to reveal itself without struggle. And in that softer rhythm, something else begins to settle into place. Not confidence the way the world usually defines it. Not the loud kind. Not the kind that announces itself when it enters a room. This confidence arrives quietly, almost unnoticed, like a deep breath you didn't realize you were holding. You stop rehearsing explanations in your head. Stop preparing defenses before anyone has even questioned you. You don't feel the need to fill every silence anymore. There's a calm in knowing who you are without needing consensus. At this stage of life, confidence doesn't come from being certain about everything. It comes from being at peace with not needing to prove anything. You know your values now. You know what drains you. You know what feels honest in your body and what feels like performance. And Aquarius, that knowing changes how people experience you. They may not be able to name it, but they feel it. Your steadiness, your presence. The way you listen without trying to fix. The way you speak without urgency. There is trust in that. You see, the more you allow your sensitivity to exist without apology, the more people sense your integrity, your emotional intelligence, your capacity to hold space instead of dominating it. Sensitivity was never your weakness. It was your instrument. And now that you're no longer hiding it or trying to harden yourself against the world, it becomes something others lean into. Opportunities don't arrive with fireworks. They arrive through conversations that feel natural, through invitations that don't require you to be anyone else, through connections that feel mutual, not transactional. Tell me something gently, when did you first learn that being yourself was something you had to justify? That belief shaped so much of your early life. It taught you to earn acceptance, to over-deliver, to stay impressive instead of authentic. But you've outgrown that pattern. Now self-love isn't something you think about. It's something you live. It's the way you leave situations that drain you sooner, the way you choose rest without guilt, the way you let your yes be intentional and your no be clean. This kind of confidence doesn't chase recognition. It attracts resonance. People who see you clearly, work that aligns instead of overwhelms, relationships that feel safe enough to be real. And the most surprising part is how little effort it takes once you stop pretending. You don't need to become louder to be seen. You don't need to become harder to be respected. You don't need to become smaller to belong. You already do. Aquarius, this is what happens when you trust your inner authority. When you let your calm speak for you. When you stop asking the world who you should be. And as this quiet confidence settles in, something ahead begins to respond. Not immediately, not dramatically, but steadily. As if life has been waiting for you to finally stand in yourself, without tension, without armor, without explanation. And once that happens, what comes next won't feel like a test. It will feel like recognition. And once that quiet confidence settles in, your attention starts to shift again. Not toward ambition the way it used to look. Not toward proving anything. But toward something simpler. Something that has been walking beside you for a long time. You notice it in the moments that don't feel like work. The thing you return to when no one is watching. The activity that steadies you. That makes time soften instead of rush. It doesn't announce itself as a dream. It doesn't demand a spotlight. It just feels honest. At this stage of life, passion doesn't need to be loud. It doesn't need to be impressive. It just needs to be real enough that you don't have to force yourself to show up. And Aquarius, you begin to see that what you love has been teaching you something quietly. Discipline without pressure. Curiosity without urgency. Commitment without exhaustion. That matters. Because the idea that fulfillment must come from dramatic leaps or risky all-or-nothing decisions belongs to an earlier version of life. You're not here to burn everything down. You're here to build intelligently. So instead of asking what should I quit, you start asking what can I grow alongside what already sustains me. You begin to understand that sustainability is its own kind of success. There is wisdom in parallel paths, in letting something meaningful expand slowly without putting your nervous system at risk, in allowing income and purpose to meet each other halfway. This isn't about turning joy into pressure. It's about letting what feels natural become useful in a way that honors your pace. Tell me something, what have you been doing consistently even when no one told you to? That answer holds more truth than most career advice ever will. Aquarius energy thrives when it's given room to experiment, to refine, to evolve without rigid expectations. And when you stop treating what you love as something separate from real life, something shifts. You start taking it more seriously without suffocating it. You invest in it with care instead of urgency. You learn how to let it support you without demanding that it become everything. That balance is what makes it sustainable. There's a maturity in realizing you don't need to gamble your stability to live a meaningful life. You don't need to romanticize struggle to justify fulfillment. You can build something solid without betraying what you enjoy. And slowly, what once felt like a side note begins to create structure, rhythm, reliability. Not overnight, not magically, but honestly. You begin to see yourself differently, not just as someone who works to survive, but as someone who creates value by being deeply engaged with what feels true. That realization changes how you approach the future. It replaces anxiety with curiosity, pressure with patience, fear with grounded excitement. And as this alignment deepens, you'll notice something else. Life doesn't rush you anymore. It meets you where you are. It responds to consistency, not intensity. Stay with this steady unfolding. Because what's forming now is not just about income or productivity. It's about a life that can actually support you without asking you to disappear inside it. And from here, the connections you attract, the opportunities that appear, will start to reflect that same integrity. And that is when everything begins to feel both lighter and more real. And as your life begins to feel more supportive, something quietly changes in the way you relate to people. Not suddenly, not dramatically, just enough that you start noticing what no longer feels right. There was a time when intensity felt like connection, when chemistry felt like meaning, when fixing someone felt like purpose. You were drawn to sparks, to stories, to emotional highs that made you feel alive. But over time, you paid for that intensity with exhaustion. And now something in you has softened. not closed. Softened. You don't crave chaos anymore. You don't mistake urgency for love. You don't confuse attachment with intimacy. What you want now is peace that doesn't bore you in depth, that doesn't demand you disappear. You notice it in conversations. How quickly you sense when something feels performative. How your body responds when someone truly listens. How silence no longer scares you when it's shared with the right person. Aquarius, this shift didn't happen because you lowered your standards. It happened because you raised your self-respect. You stopped asking, how do I keep this connection, and started asking, how does this connection make me feel? That question changes everything. You no longer stay where you have to overextend. You don't explain yourself into exhaustion. You don't chase consistency from people who only show up in fragments. And without forcing anything, your world begins to simplify. Some connections fade quietly. No confrontation, no drama, just a natural distance created by growth. Others remain and feel surprisingly easy. There's less performance, more presence, less emotional labor, more mutual care. Tell me something honestly, when was the last time a relationship made you feel more like yourself instead of less? That feeling, that subtle sense of safety, is not ordinary. It's what happens when you begin to treat yourself with the same respect you once reserved for others. Love doesn't need to hurt to be real. Connection doesn't need to consume you to matter. At this stage of your life, you're not looking for someone to complete you. You're looking for someone who can walk beside you without leaning too hard, without pulling you off your center. And this applies beyond romance, friendships, work relationships, creative partnerships. Anything that requires you to abandon yourself will eventually lose its appeal, and what remains will feel grounded, respectful, quietly nourishing, not perfect, not idealized, just real enough to last. You're not becoming distant, you're becoming selective. You're learning that intimacy is not about intensity but about consistency, about being able to rest in someone's presence without vigilance. And as you honor that truth, the connections that enter your life next will reflect it back to you. They won't rush you, they won't drain you, they won't ask you to be smaller. They'll meet you as you are now. Stay with this discernment, because what you're cultivating is not isolation, it's alignment. And from here, the way you love, the way you connect, and the way you share your life will begin to feel less like effort and more like home. And slowly, almost without you noticing, the idea of good news begins to change. It doesn't arrive as a breakthrough moment, no announcement, no dramatic shift that others can point to and say, there it is. Instead, it shows up quietly, in the way your body rests more deeply at night, in the way your thoughts don't spiral the way they used to, in the way the future no longer feels like something you have to outrun. You wake up and there's less tension in your chest, less urgency to fix your life immediately, less fear that time is slipping through your hands. That's not nothing. That's everything. For a long time you believed good news had to look like arrival, like a destination reached, like proof that you made the right choices. But now you understand something gentler. Good news can be a state of being. It's the moment you stop waking up already tired, the moment your inner voice softens, the moment you trust yourself enough to meet uncertainty without panic. Aquarius, you don't doubt yourself the way you once did. You still question. You still reflect. But the questioning no longer feels like self-betrayal. It feels like care. You don't rush decisions anymore because you don't believe you're running out of time. You move slower not because you're afraid, but because you're listening. There's a difference, and that difference creates safety. Not the kind of safety that keeps you small, but the kind that allows you to expand without losing yourself. A new direction is forming now. Not aggressively, not impatiently. It's unfolding in alignment with who you've become. It doesn't demand you abandon your past. It integrates it, uses it, honors it. You're not starting over. You're continuing with more truth than before. Tell me something softly, when was the last time you felt allowed to live differently without needing permission? That feeling, that quiet permission you've given yourself, is the real shift. You're not chasing a version of life that looks good anymore. You're choosing one that feels sustainable, one you can stay inside without shrinking. And even if you can't fully name what comes next, you're no longer afraid of it, because you trust the way you're moving now, the way you pause, the way you choose, the way you protect your peace. That trust is the good news. It means you're safe inside yourself. It means you're no longer at war with time. It means you're living from alignment, not urgency. And from here, everything that arrives, work, love, connection, purpose, will meet you at the level of that truth. Nothing rushed, nothing forced, just real. Stay with this steadiness. Let it deepen. Because the life opening in front of you may not be loud, but it is honest. And it's yours. Before you go, I want you to take a moment and feel where you are right now. Not where you think you should be. Not where you were before. But here, in this breath, in this version of yourself, if something in this story stayed with you, if a sentence landed a little deeper than expected, that's not coincidence. That's recognition. Aquarius, the good news was never meant to arrive as noise. It was meant to arrive as steadiness. As a quiet inner yes that doesn't need permission anymore. You didn't come here to be fixed. You came here to remember. To remember that your pace is valid. Your sensitivity is intelligent. Your path does not need to look like anyone else's to be meaningful. If this message felt like it was speaking directly to you, I invite you to do something simple. Leave a comment, even just a word or a symbol to mark this moment. Not for me. For you. And if this space feels safe, if it feels like a place you want to return to, subscribe so you don't have to find your way back alone. There's more coming. Not louder, but clearer. The journey doesn't end here. It continues in the choices you make gently, in the boundaries you honor quietly, in the trust you place back into yourself. And the next message will meet you exactly where you are when you're ready to hear it. Until then, be kind to your nervous system. Be patient with your unfolding. And most of all, trust yourself. You're doing better than you think.